everyone. Welcome back to ESG Decoded. I'm your host, Kaitlyn Allen. And today I have Dimitry Gershenson with me. He is the CEO and co-founder of Enduring Planet. I'm so excited to have him on. We've known each other a couple of years now and have followed his work. For those of you who are new to ESG, climate change, of course, is one of the key E issues, one of the key environmental issues that both companies and across the capital markets, investors are also figuring out how to grapple with. So Enduring Planet is just a really interesting business model. And Dimitry comes to us with 15 years of experience in climate and impact investing, and also as an operator in this space. So happy to have you on, Dimitry. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Kaitlyn. Stoked to be here.
So I thought we should start a little bit with just some background on Enduring Planet. So what is your model and what makes it unique?
Sure. So we at Enduring Planet provide fast, flexible, and founder-friendly, non-dilutive financing to climate entrepreneurs. So we, as opposed to venture investing, growth equity investing, we provide debt capital, corporate debt capital. We invest with two instruments today. So we have a product for companies that are winners of state or federal grant funding, where they might want to advance some of that capital forward to execute faster on the grant. Often there's big bureaucratic or delays in that funding from the moment that you're getting it to the moment that you actually do. And so we help bridge that gap. And then we also have a product for early revenue businesses, where we will invest via revenue-based financing structure. So we give them capital and they pay us a portion of their revenue for an anticipated term. And in all cases, there's no collateral, there's no personal guarantees, there's no liens, there's no complex covenants of any kind. It's a 10-minute application process. We get term sheets out in about a week and we fund in under 30 days. So it's pretty fast.
I mean, part of that is that's a really amazing niche, right? But also part of that is really unbelievable for someone who's been a founder in this space. That's really incredible.
Thanks.
So could you share a little bit more about why you founded Enduring Planet? Obviously, there was this precise issue of funding and getting funding to these businesses, but would love to hear a little bit more about what led you to found the company.
I mean, I've been working in climate my whole career since 2009, and I've been in the impact investing space since about 2015. And I think throughout that time, I've seen the challenges that climate businesses face around raising capital. And if we ever hope to meet any climate objectives, we need to pump an insane amount of money into the sort of climate ecosystem. And by most estimates, that's a $5 trillion a year problem across all capital types. But within corporate debt specifically, a lot of the sort of models and estimates are in the sort of $700 billion a year range. $700 billion a year is a lot. It's also important to note that about $500 billion of that chunk is just not being deployed today. So there's a really big market opportunity. There's a really big need. And if we ever hope to stay between 2 degrees C, we have to put that money to work every year for the next decade, foreseeable future. And, interestingly enough, there really aren't many players serving this sort of earlier stage debt market. There's quite a few banks that invest into much more established, large transaction size for profitable deals. There are some venture debt lenders who have, call it allocations for climate, but a lot of those institutions, a lot of the structures preclude a very large segment of the population from accessing credit. And that means that folks either don't raise money at all, or they have to go to much more dilutive or predatory instruments to then grow. And that just seems unacceptable to me. Like, how can we hope to all survive if this is what we leave our innovators with?
And I think the other interesting thing about the energy sector in general, because of course, a lot of this, it's not just energy, right? It's also water. There's a lot of cross-cutting issues within climate change as a topic, but, specifically to energy, we know that a lot of the innovation that needs to happen is years, if not decades long.
Yeah.
And that's been part of this discussion, right? Is, how do we get both corporate investment and capital flows in the right direction, in the right companies, in the earliest stages, making sure that we are supporting that innovation in a space that's, frankly, I think a lot of cases seen as more risky just because it's a longer payout. It needs more patient capital, at least in a lot of cases that I've seen. So
yeah, you have to we think about climate very broadly, and that means that there's a pretty big range of revenue models and trajectories that we see. Obviously, for our revenue-based financing investing, companies have to have revenue and revenue track record. But with the grant advance, one of the things that's really exciting to see is that folks are executing on very frontier innovation way faster as a result. Because what often happens for our sort of prospective partners and customers is that they'll win a grant, let's say, I don't know, $3 million from the DOE, right? They'll find out about it in March. It'll take 6 months to contract, and then it's another 90 days for their first reimbursement. These are often cooperative agreements where the company has to pay for the work up front and then get reimbursed. So then the question is where are they getting the money to pay for the work up front? And so then they have to go raise it elsewhere. And if you're raising at that stage, pre-completion of this grant, you're getting really crap terms from equity investors, and you're giving away a large chunk of your company for what? Just to get paid back in 6 months? It makes no sense at all. And for folks who have raised money, they have to divert really expensive capital towards executing on this work when instead it could be put to work in, R&D, hiring, et cetera. And so in our case, we're helping to accelerate that innovation by providing this working capital to execute on a grant. And we see that as a pretty big need in the market.
I think it's just fantastic. It's really amazing. Do you have any kind of early success stories, examples, somebody you'd like to make a shout out to?
Oh man, I have lots of shout outs that I would like to do. We actually publish case studies on basically every deal we've done on our website, so people can see the types of innovations we're funding and also to get a sense of whether or not our capital is right for them. I'm excited about all of our partners. I try not to pick winners.
I didn't mean to put you
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. I would just direct people to sort of take a look at our case studies and see the breadth of companies that we're supporting. We've invested in small businesses that serve, customers in a single geography with composting and circular economy services. We've invested in large, startups that have big software plays across the entire US. We sort of cover the gamut. And interestingly enough, I think the degree to which these companies are able to weather this complex macroeconomic environment is always really impressive to me. And I'm continuously amazed at the resilience and performance of folks in this ecosystem, because a lot of this work is really hard. And Enduring Planet's also a startup, but I'm not out there in a lab trying to develop some kind of insane piece of hardware that helps with material management in recycling. I'm not doing that work, and it's not easy. So I just commend all of them. I think they're all rock stars.
I think that's such a great example, the materials science, because I think a lot of people come to the space thinking wind energy and renewables, and that's one important piece of a very big puzzle. But this is every product we use.
Yeah.
This is every article of clothing almost that we use, all of your athleisure, everything that makes our modern world modern, has a heavy footprint.
Yeah.
Most things do. It's such a huge, complex problem. And I just really think it's so cool the way you're bringing capital at this stage, because it's material science, it's how we recycle, can't, or come up with new ways to recycle. It's the infrastructure, both digital and physical. It touches every part of our modern lives.
Yeah. And we view it the same way. I think for us, this sort of transition to a new climate economy will require innovation at every single step of our, economic journey as consumers, as governments, as businesses. And we are equally excited by the companies that sell low carbon diapers as we are by the companies that build complex algorithms to manage like the future of the grid. It's all in scope for us. And I think that's one thing that I often really struggle with in the sort of climate tech investing ecosystem is that folks are so tied to, weird, like arbitrary gigaton thresholds or some like carbon metric where often the innovations that are required are actually indirect and where attribution is really hard. And that's something that we're really proud of. Like for us, as long as climate is a core part of your corporate mission, you're likely in scope for us. And there are edge cases where folks have a sustainability solution which actually isn't connected to climate change, and then they're not, and that's okay. But we also take pride in helping folks raise capital, whether it's our money or not. So we shared deal flow with over 250 VCs in climate. We shared deal flow with a bunch of other lenders and project finance investors and receivables finance investors, like you name it. We probably know people who can help you with the kind of capital that you need as an entrepreneur. And we don't charge for it. So when folks come to us and we're like, look, you're not a fit for us, our next question is, how can we help you get the money that you need?
That's awesome. What other challenges do you see in the space, just more broadly, thinking about the investment world? There's so many published studies about how much money goes to white founders versus not, men versus women, all of that type of stuff. How are you guys approaching that at Enduring?
So we have an explicit mandate to prioritize investing in underrepresented founders and diverse teams. Over 80% of our existing portfolio and our pipeline meets one of our sort of DEIJ criteria. I do think that this is a really problematic trend. I mean, it's like an issue in all sort of capital deployment, but in particular in climate, where the distribution of resources is not equitable, and it's also not really aligned with the kind of future that I think a lot of folks argue should be the future. And so for folks who are deploying capital in a space who don't have any kind of DEIJ criteria as part of their investment process, I would very much urge them to do that. It also in some ways makes it easier to raise capital as a money manager, because increasingly folks who are devoting dollars to climate are starting to put requirements around diversity, equity, inclusion, justice in their sort of underwriting process. It's just kind of shocking to me that we exist in a world where in 2023, folks have portfolios of teams of all white guys. Like there's no excuse. That means you're not doing your job. It's not like some indication of the market.
I think that's a pretty strong statement, Dimitry. And just for folks who don't know about this space, there's a lot written out there about it. I'd encourage you to read the books on this. This is not something that in our little niche space we think is not fair and we need to promote it. Like this is actually a really major, well-documented problem in really alternative markets. So thanks. I appreciate you bringing it up, Dimitry, and just speaking a little bit about how you guys have added specific criteria around it to help make sure that there is equity in your, both in what deals you're doing, but also in the pipeline, kind of thinking that future thinking mindset. So very interesting. What are you most excited about? I know that you're doing a lot of hard work. You are rolling up your sleeves. I know you're being humble, that you're not in the lab. But I know your sleeves are
literally
up right now.
Literally.
What are you most excited about? You do see a lot. You look at tons and tons and tons of companies. You're familiar with what's happening in the space. What are you most excited about for your space?
So I've kind of like the lame answer and maybe a better answer. The lame answer is I'm excited about all of it. I think that we are at the start of this sort of like Cambrian explosion in climate. And that's true across the spectrum of businesses that can be built. It's everything from the frontier tech startups to the folks building, niche software to the folks doing consulting work in the space. Like there's just this insane trajectory, right, of growth and expansion, and it will only accelerate. And the market conditions now are unique in that the deck is kind of stacked against everyone else and in favor of this like new climate economy. So between US regulatory frameworks like the IRA to what's happening in Europe to Canada, Australia, Inflation Reduction Act, thank you. Yeah, it's $80 billion a year in tax incentives and grants and other financial instruments coming from the federal government, not to mention all of the state efforts, California, New York, Washington, Oregon, like Jersey, you name it, there's like something supporting the growth of this ecosystem. And I've been in the space long enough to know what the first wave looked like, and it wasn't that. And so a lot of folks who like think about climate tech or climate, they're like, oh, it's like that time when Solyndra blew up. It's all just like whatever, it's going to crap out again. It's like, you don't understand. There's no way down for this ecosystem. It's only going to go in one direction. And so people can either choose to get in now or they can choose to get in later. Either way, they're going to be involved. I think, in terms of like cool tech or those types of things, for me, I am floored every single day by folks who come to us for money. And, I feel like I get sort of like all the different models and I've seen a lot of different business, and literally every day somebody shows up and is like, I'm building this. And I'm like, I've never seen that before. That's insane. And it's like a $10 billion market. And it's just so cool and gets me so excited. So.
That's awesome. Well, Dimitry, I think this has just been super, super interesting. I know we will definitely include the link to Enduring Planet in our show notes so that folks can go take a look at all those awesome case studies that you mentioned. And, if you're out there listening because you are curious on how to get funding, take a look. This is a really unique model, and it's something that is obviously really, really important right now, particularly with the Inflation Reduction Act, all of the grants and loans out there. So really excited that you guys are in this space, kind of filling that gap for innovation. And I think, one other final thought from me is that the way you're talking about this opportunity, I mean, we've been talking about not just climate change related technology, economic transformation, etc., but the broader environmental, social governance, as we're looking at all of these topics, which vary, and the issues vary from client to client, they vary from industry to industry, but there is so much opportunity in seeking to solve these sort of global problems or seeking to solve these externalities. There's so much opportunity there, and it's a really exciting time to be in the space. And I think you summarized that really well. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great. Really appreciate it.